My name is Matthew Martinez. Now I'm 35. I have a successful career, a stable income, a comfortable home in Seattle, and a deep, burning resentment that smolders within me, poisoning me every day. But let's start from the very beginning. I was born and raised in Orlando, Florida, a city that seems like a tourist paradise, but for locals it's anything but simple. Where for some there are amusement parks, sparkling streets, and eternal summer, for others there is a difficult reality hidden behind the facade of a festive life. In my area, everyone knew each other. There was no place for secrets, but there was room for ridicule. Since childhood, I understood that if you want to survive in such an environment, you need to be either strong or invisible. I chose the second one. As the youngest of three children, I knew from childhood what it was like to compete for attention. The older brother is a born leader, charismatic, confident, always in the center of events. A sister is an ideal, the pride of parents, a standard that should be met. What about me? I was that middle child who is not noticed, who is rarely admired, but for some reason always expects a lot from him. The constant feeling that you are somewhere in between, that you are not the first and not the best, has been ingrained in me since an early age. Maybe that's why I always felt a little alien in my own family, as if I was looking for a place that was already occupied by someone else. I was never a sports star, I had no natural charm, and girls did not look at me with admiration. But all this would not be so important if not for one detail, my most painful wound, something that became a constant source of shame and uncertainty. From early adolescence, I understood that nature had not treated me so generously where, as is commonly believed, a man should have pride. As a child, it didn't really matter, but over the years, the laughs in the locker room, the casual jokes thrown in, the glances that seemed to linger a little longer than necessary, all of this sank into my mind, leaving scars. Every visit to the pool or school locker room became a challenge for me. I felt myself tense, anxiety growing inside me. It seemed to me that if I was left without the protection of clothing, the whole world would see my shame, judge me, and laugh. And this feeling, this gnawing uncertainty, did not disappear over time. She became a part of me, a shadow side that I learned to hide, but could never conquer. I desperately tried to compensate for this deficiency. First academic success, then career achievements. I pushed myself forward, worked harder than others, strived to be the best in everything that depended not on the body, but on the mind. But no matter how many heights I reached, the complex did not disappear. He followed me like a dark shadow, always reminding me of who I really was. I have become a person who calculates every step, every word, every meeting. I built my life like a chess game, where there could be no mistakes, because any mistake could expose my weakness. I learned to control everything, my voice, posture, facial expression, even my gaze, so that no one would guess that fear lives inside me. This fear became my eternal companion, an invisible enemy that I could not destroy, but with which I learned to live. I went to university in Atlanta as far away from the past as possible, from the memories that clung to me, not allowing me to breathe. Here I could start from scratch. I became what my parents always dreamed of me being, a promising lawyer, a person who has a future, status, respect. In this city, I was able to build a new version of myself, one who was not haunted by jokes from the past, one who looked confident, calculating, charismatic. I learned to play my role to perfection. Hide your complexes behind impeccable posture, behind the right smile, behind the confidence in your voice. I easily carried on a conversation, made acquaintances, aroused the sympathy and even interest of women. All I had to do was follow the script I wrote for myself. But no matter how much I worked on myself, no matter how much I convinced the world that I was different, a constant, gnawing anxiety remained inside. Fear that one day someone will look behind the mask, see the real me, and expose me. When I first saw Ashley, the world didn't just freeze, it seemed to shrink to the point where only her eyes remained, sharp and deep, like a blade that could cut through silence. I didn't look for her, didn't wait, didn't build romantic castles in my head. She burst into my life like a random gust of wind that rips an unlocked door off its hinges. The meeting was organized by my colleague, Mark Davis, one of those lawyers who always weave networks of connections between people without noticing it themselves. "You should meet her," he said one day, pouring us a glass of whiskey at the bar after a busy day at work. "You'll like her. Smart, with character, and most importantly, without pathos." I didn't pay much attention to his words, but a few days later Mark invited me to dinner with a small group, and there was Ashley. The evening began in a restaurant not pretentious, but not cheap either, with dim lights and the hum of voices, where everyone is trying to seem a little smarter than they are. I came with no expectations, slightly tired after a day of work, and a desire to quickly drink a glass of something strong. But then she appeared. Ashley didn't enter, she floated in, as if she knew that all eyes would involuntarily be drawn to her. Not beauty in the usual sense of the word, rather, some kind of attractive force, a mixture of confidence and mystery. Her voice, when she spoke, was low, with a slight hoarseness, as if she had just laughed at something that I had not heard. "So you're the mysterious lawyer Mark told me about?" she said with a slight grin, extending her hand to me. I squeezed her hand, warm and strong. "I hope he didn't praise me too much," I replied. She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, don't worry. I know lawyers always exaggerate." After this conversation, everything started to spin by itself. We sat at the same table, argued, laughed, exchanged teasing, and I suddenly caught myself thinking that I wanted to see her again. Then the messages began short, sharp, like shots, but each time with subtext that made him think about her longer than he should have. Walking around Atlanta became a ritual. The asphalt soaked in heat, streetlights that cast long shadows, and her laugh harsh, almost defiant, but damn lively. In a cafe, she ordered coffee without sugar, looking at me over the cup as if she knew more about me than I did. "Do you always analyze people like this?" I asked one day, watching her examine the strangers passing us. "Of course," she shrugged. "Does this look like you're trying to figure me out?" She smiled. "You are a most interesting case, Matthew," she said, lingering her gaze on me a little longer than usual. "And you know what's the funniest thing? You can't even imagine how much." Ashley was the first person who made me feel not just wanted, but complete. I had long feared that my body would be the cause of ridicule or disappointment, but her reaction was different. She didn't show it when she first saw me naked, and then, as if sensing my uncertainty, she slowly ran her fingers over my shoulder and whispered, "It's not the size that matters, but what you do with it." She did everything she could to make me believe it. Her kindness, her sincerity, her absolute confidence that I was enough, dispelled my fears one after another. Instead of words, there were actions. Her body reacted, her kisses were hot, and her eyes said more than 1,000 assurances could say. Every time she made me feel like I was the best. And damn it, I was starting to believe it. Sex with her was not just physical pleasure, it was an immersion in a world where I was accepted without reservations. I learned to be relaxed, brave, to allow myself what previously seemed unacceptable. She laughed when I tried to seem experienced, and became serious when I talked about my complexes. And at that moment, for the first time in many years, I believed that this was enough. The year flew by like one short exhalation, quickly, almost imperceptibly. But everything was boiling inside me. I knew I wanted more. I wanted to take the next step, and for this I chose exactly that cafe. Not out of sentimentality, no, I was not a person who clings to the past. It's just that it was there, in a dim corner at a small table, that I first heard her words. "I like you." She said this with such intonation as if she was challenging him. Without embarrassment, without asking a question, as if she knew that the answer was obvious, that it could not be otherwise. The spring evening embraced the city with warm air, in which the aromas of fresh rain and blooming magnolias mixed. In his trouser pocket there was a ring, a small symbol of a big step, and it seemed red-hot, like red-hot metal. I gathered my courage and began to speak, but didn't have time. She just looked at me, barely smiled, nodded, and threw her short yes. It was as if this moment had been predetermined from the very beginning. It was as if she always knew that I would ask, and she would answer. Our marriage was like a well-tuned engine, It worked without failures. Coffee in the morning, her hand in mine in the evening, laughter that echoed from the walls. Ashley worked as a psychologist in a private clinic, helping people cope with their inner demons. She often said that it was easier to understand other people's problems than her own. We went on vacation, trying to choose places where we could not just lie on the beach, but learn something new, from ancient temples in Greece to secluded villages in France. Our conversations were never boring. We discussed books, films, philosophical ideas, and even argued about the future of technology. We met with friends, had cozy dinners at home, planned where we would go next year, and what steps we would take to grow in our careers. I thought that I had built a fortress, impregnable and protected from any storms. 10 years flew by unnoticed. Time erased boundaries, days merged into a familiar rhythm, and life went on as usual. Ashley and I seemed to have the perfect work-life balance. She continued to work as a psychologist in a private clinic, helping people fight their fears and worries. I delved into legal practice, focusing on complex cases that required analytical thinking and endurance. But lately, I started to notice that something has changed. Ashley became more and more absent-minded, her gaze often lingered in emptiness, and her thoughts seemed to be hovering somewhere far away. She spent a long time at work, and at home increasingly preferred to retire to her office, explaining this by fatigue and difficult cases at the reception. She was less and less interested in our family affairs, rejected invitations to meet with friends, and our conversations turned into routine phrases, devoid of the former warmth. At first, I didn't attach any importance to this. The work of a psychologist has always been emotionally challenging, and I knew that Ashley sometimes had a hard time dealing with other people's stories. She told me more than once about patients who needed special support and how she worried about their fates. Sometimes she came home silent and thoughtful, but this was temporary. Usually after a few days off, she became her old self again. But this time it was different. Her mood did not improve, and the distance between us seemed to increase every day. She laughed less often, was almost not interested in our joint plans, and our evening conversations were reduced to short, abrupt phrases. "Are you okay?" I asked one day at dinner, when she pushed the plate away for the umpteenth time, barely touching the food. She looked up at me with tired eyes and smiled tightly. "Yes, it's just a difficult situation at work. A client with a very difficult story. I need time to digest everything." I nodded, trying not to press. This was nothing new. She always cared deeply about her patients. I decided that it was better not to stress myself out, but a slight anxiety had already settled inside. Every day her behavior became more and more distant. She began to return home later, citing additional consultations, and increasingly said that she needed to be alone to collect her thoughts. I tried to convince myself that this was just work, that, as always, she was delving too deeply into other people's problems. After all, this has happened before. I woke up late, enjoying the rare morning when I didn't have to rush to work. The sun was already high in the room, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee was in the air. I stretched, enjoying this feeling of unhurriedness, then lazily got out of bed and went downstairs. Ashley left long ago. She was on duty at the clinic, and the whole day was at my disposal. After a breakfast of avocado toast and strong coffee, I decided it was time to clean up. Work and other worries left our home in slight chaos. Old newspapers piled up on the coffee table, books were scattered on the sofa, and traces of last night's dinner remained in the kitchen. I have always considered myself a fairly organized person, but even I understood that it was time to restore order. I started in the living room, methodically, with concentration, as if putting order not only in the house, but also in my thoughts. I wiped the dust off the shelves, put the books in their places, and neatly folded the blankets on the sofa. With every movement, the space around became more orderly, comfortable, as if regaining its breath. This feeling was strangely transmitted to me. Then he went to the kitchen. I washed the dishes, wiped down the countertops, and threw away unnecessary packaging. I suddenly noticed that I was even enjoying it. The process, which seemed routine, suddenly acquired an almost therapeutic effect. Simple mechanical movements calmed me down, and gave me a feeling of control over something tangible. When I got to the bedroom, I decided to take care of the drawers in the nightstand. As always, little things accumulated there that were forgotten over time. Old receipts, buttons, small accessories, empty medicine packages. I sorted through them as if I was sifting out the unnecessary not only from space, but also from myself. And suddenly my hand came across a small box. Plain, black, without any inscriptions. She was unremarkable, but for some reason she smelled of something. Unfamiliar, or, on the contrary, too familiar. My heart froze for a moment, and then, succumbing to a sudden impulse, I opened it. Inside was a sex toy, brand new in packaging. I paused for a second, looking at it, then slowly closed the box and put it back in the drawer. A feeling of strange surprise ran down my spine. Ashley and I never discussed these things. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she bought it for us, but hasn't decided to tell me yet. Or perhaps she was just experimenting with something new. In the end, it was quite normal. We are adults, and everyone has the right to personal preferences. I continued cleaning, but the thought of the find returned periodically. I suddenly wondered when exactly she bought it. Lately, Ashley has often been absent-minded, distant, and said that she has difficult cases at work. Perhaps it's just a coincidence, and I'm needlessly stressing myself out. However, there was something nagging at the back of my mind, a slight feeling of unease that I couldn't immediately explain. After the cleaning was finished, I realized that I needed to occupy myself with something, to distract myself from the thoughts that, despite the order in the house, continued to rush around randomly in my head. I turned on the TV, mindlessly watched a couple of episodes of the old series, but the plot eluded me. My thoughts still returned to what was haunting me. Then I decided to switch to something more tangible, something that could bring joy not only to me, but also to her. I went to the kitchen and started cooking. I wanted to do something special for Ashley, even if it was just for a regular dinner. I chose her favorite dish, pesto pasta, and paired it with rosemary-baked chicken, the aroma of which filled the kitchen with a warm, homey feel. I hoped that this small gesture, this dinner, prepared not out of habit, but with thoughts of her, could at least slightly reduce the strange distance that had recently invisibly stood between us. Maybe just one evening without omissions, without tense silence, when we will just be together, remembering how it was before, when everything between us was simpler. A few days passed, and I began to notice changes in Ashley's behavior. They were subtle, but noticeable. Grace appeared in her gait, a slight playfulness appeared in her voice, and in her gaze there was a hidden confidence that was not there before. She seemed to be reinventing herself, and the process was drawing me in. The first week it still felt like a game. She laughed more often, casually touched my shoulder, ran her fingers along my arm, lingering a little longer than necessary. Something new appeared in her kisses: persistence, desire, exploratory interest. It was as if she was testing the boundaries of what was permitted, experimenting, observing my reaction. Each of our evenings became more and more eventful. We dined by candlelight. She sat opposite, slightly shaking her glass of wine, and her look spoke more than words. When I tried to carry on a normal conversation, she would interrupt me, subtly touching my neck with her lips, and there was something mesmerizing in her movements, making me forget about everything. In the second week, the changes became so obvious that it was no longer possible to ignore them. She didn't just flirt, she completely seized the initiative, playing the game by her own rules. If before our intimacy was familiar, predictable, rooted in comfort and routine, now everything has changed. She no longer waited for me to make the first move. Now her movements were confident, her desires were obvious, and her touches were decisive. She chose the rhythm, set the pace, led me along, leaving no room for doubt. There was an authority in her voice that I had never heard before, and in her gaze there was a spark of insolence from which a wave of excitement and something else rose inside me. It turned on, hooked, excited to the limit, but at the same time it left a strange feeling of dissonance. It was as if something in her had changed so much that I no longer fully understood who was in front of me. Our nights became different. Sometimes she would wake me up in the middle of the night, her body hot, demanding, craving closeness. She whispered in my ear, forcing me to completely surrender to the moment, leading me, making me understand that she was no longer the same as before. I succumbed to this, but I could not get rid of the feeling that something had changed, and not only in her behavior, but also in her body. It no longer felt the same as before. It was at this moment that my brain began to work at full capacity, analyzing every detail of her behavior. Her gaze was increasingly fixed on the screen of her phone or laptop, and when I walked past, she closed the tabs too quickly. Some evenings she would put on her headphones and linger in the living room, staring intently at the screen. At first, I didn't attach any importance to this. She could have some work to do, new hobbies, or just a desire to be alone. But soon I began to notice a pattern. When I walked into the room, her face changed. She looked like I had caught her doing something personal, which was weird. I told myself that I wouldn't bother asking questions right away, that I'll give her time. Maybe I'm just screwing myself over. But the disturbing thoughts stuck in my head like splinters, and the more I tried to ignore them, the deeper they grew. I tried to convince myself that everything was okay, that change was natural. But was it? One night, when Ashley fell asleep, I lay next to her, listening to her even breathing, and felt the tension inside me only growing. The room was dark, but my mind was boiling with guesses. At some point, I just couldn't stand it. Carefully, holding my breath, I reached for her phone, trying not to wake her. I wasn't going to go too far. I didn't want to be the one invading the personal space of a loved one. But somewhere deep inside, I already knew. If I don't check, if I don't see with my own eyes, I won't have peace. Because the fear of the truth was insignificant compared to the painful unknown. When I unlocked the screen, I saw the browser history. There were too many links to video platforms that were broadcasting content of a clearly non-standard nature. These were video chats where users could communicate in real time, as well as collections of videos with men who were united by one feature: physical data that significantly exceeded the average, and mine was even more so. I swiped my finger across the screen, studying recent searches, and felt my insides tighten. Questions swarmed in my head, crawling on top of each other, replacing each other, circling like annoying flies, not allowing me to concentrate on a single thought. Is this just curiosity, or something more? Why now? Why so abruptly? I remembered her recent emancipation, the sudden confidence with which she took the initiative in bed, her new desires, courage, experiments that were previously unusual for us. Then it seemed to me that these were just changes, a spontaneous outburst of passion, but now all of this suddenly came together into a single, too logical picture. From this realization, a strange, viscous feeling came over me, a mixture of anxiety, confusion, and some kind of dull, suppressed anger. Something heavy squeezed in my chest, as if a cold metal fist was clenching inside me, not allowing me to breathe. It was similar to the feeling when you accidentally trip on the stairs, a moment of absolute panic, when the world loses its support and your heart falls somewhere down. I felt an unpleasant cold running down my back, and my fingers involuntarily clenching into fists. What if everything I told myself was a lie? What if the answers I was so afraid of getting were closer than I thought? I didn't know if I was ready to accept the truth. I didn't know if I could bear what I might find. But he understood one thing: it was too late to retreat. There was no turning back. I scrolled through the messages. Some of them were sent late at night when I was already asleep. Correspondence with unfamiliar video chat users, some deleted dialogues. All this was not direct evidence of betrayal, but the feeling of anxiety grew with every second. Thoughts flooded in, chaotic, contradictory, replacing one after another, like torn frames in a bad film. What if I'm just screwing myself over? Maybe these are just her fantasies, harmless curiosity that does not go beyond the limits of imagination. Maybe she was looking for something new for us, wanted variety, tried to rekindle a fire that was starting to fade. I forced myself to take a deep breath, tried to hold onto these thoughts, make them an anchor that would prevent me from drowning in paranoia. But my body betrayed me completely. My heart was beating too fast, echoing dully in my chest and temples. Inside, everything was clenching with an anxious premonition, as if before something inevitable. I wanted to believe it's just a mind game, that my fears are unfounded. But the longer I sat in the dark, listening to her measured breathing next to me, the more clearly I realized part of me already knew the answer, and I didn't like this answer. I carefully put the phone back in its place, trying not to make a sound, and slowly lay back down. The heart was still beating unevenly, and in my head, like a twisted spiral, guesses continued to unwind, one more alarming than the other. I tried to convince myself that it was just my suspicions, that there was no point in starting a scandal out of nowhere. But deep inside, I knew that the previous balance had been destroyed. Something shifted between us, and the shift was almost tangible. I didn't understand how far these changes had gone and wasn't sure if I was too late, or if I could still fix something. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to her even breathing next to me, but instead of the usual feeling of comfort, I was enveloped by another feeling alienation. For the first time in a long time, I felt like a stranger in my own bed, as if an invisible wall stood between us, and I could not break through it. It seemed to me that the solution was somewhere nearby, that all the answers were literally under my nose, but I couldn't see them yet, and this unknown frightened me most of all. The morning started as usual, but now every little thing seemed significant to me. Ashley was the first to wake up. When I went down to the kitchen, I was immediately enveloped by the warm, familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Ashley was already busy at the stove, and the delicious smell of browning bacon and eggs hung in the air. The scene was homely, cozy, almost perfect. Almost. She turned to me with a smile, but something in her gaze was different, a little distant, as if her thoughts were somewhere far away, or she was just hiding something well that she didn't want to talk about. "Good morning," she said, placing a cup of coffee in front of me. I nodded, sitting down at the table, not taking my eyes off her. "Good," I answered, carefully watching her movements. "You're early today." She shrugged as if it didn't matter. "Yes, I have an important meeting. I need to get ready. And you? What are your plans?" I pretended to be thoughtful, but completely different questions were spinning in my head that I could not voice. "I have the day off," I finally said, taking a sip of coffee. "I think I'll tidy up a little, sort out old things. Lately, too much junk has accumulated." I deliberately said the last words a little slower, watching her reaction. But Ashley didn't flinch. She just nodded slightly and returned to the stove, as if my words were nothing more than background noise to her. She nodded, but her attention was no longer focused on me, but on the phone, which flashed with an incoming notification. Her fingers immediately darted to the screen, and for a second her face took on a concentrated expression. She quickly glanced at the message, but didn't even respond. She simply turned off the screen and put the phone in her pocket as if nothing had happened. "Good idea," she muttered absently, as if her thoughts were already somewhere far away. "I'll run. I don't want to be late." She finished her coffee in one greedy gulp, kissed me on the cheek too quickly, too automatically, and headed out. "See you later," she said as she walked. A minute later, the front door slammed. I heard her steps in the corridor, then the sound of the elevator, and then silence. Thick, heavy, almost tangible. I was left alone. I could immediately get down to business, do everything I planned. But instead, I just sat, listening to the silence of the apartment, to my own thoughts, which seemed to whisper to me that something was wrong here. Something has changed. Something was eluding me. And I knew I couldn't just let it go. I had to get to the bottom of the truth. I started with the usual places. First, the bedside table, the same toy that I had recently found and forgotten about in the bustle, disappeared without a trace. Next is a closet in the bedroom, shelves in the bathroom. Everything looked as it should. Perfume, jewelry, cosmetics, nothing unusual, nothing that could confirm or refute my guesses. But I couldn't stop. Having opened her wardrobe, I began to move apart the hangers with clothes, carefully examining every shelf, every corner, and that's when I noticed her. At the very end, in the back of the closet, there was a box. New, big. I didn't remember her before. My heart suddenly began to beat faster, as if it had a premonition that I was about to cross a line beyond which there would be no turning back. I slowly pulled the box towards the light. She was heavier than I expected. I froze for a moment, taking a deep breath, as if about to open a door into the unknown. Then he slowly lifted the lid. What I saw made me freeze. There were several toys inside. Impressive size. Smooth, massive, they immediately caught the eye. Somewhere new, in packaging, with bright labels that left no room for ambiguity. I felt a rush of adrenaline. It hit my chest and echoed heavily in my temples. A mixture of surprise, embarrassment, and a strange, sticky realization filled me, drawing my eyes to the contents of the box. My throat is dry. There were more and more questions, but one of them stood out to me especially clearly. Who did she use it with? If she really wanted something new in our intimate life, wouldn't she have told me? Wouldn't you try to discuss this, hint at it, at least carefully lead the conversation? But she didn't say anything. These toys were not for us. I took a deep breath, trying to pull myself together, and carefully returned the box to its place, as if this could restore the lost sense of calm. A whirlpool of emotions was boiling inside me: jealousy, doubt, confusion. An unpleasant feeling squeezed my chest, as if I had stood on the edge of a cliff and could no longer retreat. But I needed answers. I remembered that Ashley always leaves her laptop in the office on her desk. Most often it was locked with a password, but I knew her habits. She complained more than once that it was inconvenient for her to enter complex combinations, preferring something simple and easy to remember. I sat down at the table, turned on the laptop, and tried the first option the day we met. Didn't fit. Then her birthday. Passed again. I clenched my teeth, forcing myself to remain cool. Then I tried another combination, the name of her favorite pet. The screen blinked. Access is open. I froze, feeling my pulse thumping dully in my temples. My heart was pounding wildly, echoing loudly in my ears. It felt like I stopped breathing, but my fingers continued to move on the touchpad, opening her digital world, revealing step by step what I might not have been ready to see. The first thing I did was look at my browser history, and immediately I felt a chill run down my back. It was like I was electrocuted. Dozens of visits to video chats, specialized platforms where users communicated in private rooms. The link titles spoke for themselves: private video chat, anonymous adult meetings, hot online shows, one after another, repeating recently. I blinked, hoping it was a mistake. Maybe an advertisement, a random click. But no, everything was too clear, too real. I moved on. Her account was active in one of the applications. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear it pounding in my ears. She went on live broadcasts, regularly, from your device. My hands were shaking when I opened the latest chats, and what I saw completely confused me. She wasn't just flirting. She took part in private video sessions, talked to strangers. The messages that flashed before me were too frank, too obvious, and some of them hinted that everything was not limited to just conversations. My chest felt tight, as if icy fingers were digging into it. A strange, unbearable feeling flooded me, a mixture of rage, pain, betrayal. I took a deep breath and went to the video folder. Among them were recordings of her sessions. She didn't just watch, she was an active participant. I froze, unable to tear myself away from what I saw. Everything was mixed up in my head. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. The question was what to do next. I have often heard the expression that pain can spur a person to decisive action, to changes that were impossible without a strong emotional push. I once thought this was an exaggeration, a nice metaphor from psychology books or motivational speeches designed to shake up those who have been stuck in their comfort zone for too long. But now I understand. There is some truth in every cliché. The pain I experienced turned out to be a catalyst for actions that I would not have even thought of a week ago. I sat motionless, feeling the icy realization spreading inside me that my life had changed at that second. The air seemed heavy, as if before a thunderstorm, thoughts were racing chaotically, but one of them flared up especially brightly. Without thinking, as if in a trance, I took out my phone and dialed the number of a person I trusted, albeit with reservations. Daniel. He once helped me on legal issues, but his real value lay elsewhere in his ability to dig deeper, to find what is hidden, to penetrate into places where ordinary people do not even try to look. We crossed paths at work several times, and I already had to resort to his not entirely legal, but damn effective methods. If anyone could shed light on what was happening, it was him. The phone rang, and after the second ring, a sleepy, slightly hoarse voice was heard. "Hello, Matt. I hope you have a good reason for calling this early." I swallowed, trying to control my voice, but the tension cut through even through the carefully controlled tone. "Hey, Dan," I managed, squeezing the phone in my hand until my knuckles turned white. "I need your help. Something complicated, personal." There was silence on the other end of the line, but I knew Dan was already on. I could almost hear him shaking his head, throwing away the remnants of sleep. "Crap. Okay, speak." Daniel didn't ask any more questions. He simply promised to be with me in an hour and a half. I knew he had an almost uncanny ability to sense when a client was serious. Today, it was obvious even through the telephone receiver. He understood. My business is not a matter of profit, not just another professional necessity. It was something deeper, personal. While I was waiting, I tried several times to distract myself. I washed the dishes even though the sink was almost empty. I sat down at my laptop and opened some legal matters that had been lingering over me for several weeks. I even tried to understand it, but the words merged into a meaningless stream. Thoughts were not obeyed. They kept coming back to the same thing: Ashley's face, her eyes, which seemed different to me lately, to the files that I looked at, to her voice in the recordings. A voice that I knew, but that sounded different, too open, too alien. I closed my eyes, but that only made everything worse. Goosebumps ran across my skin when my imagination itself painted it for me, my wife sitting in front of the camera, her half smile, her words addressed not to me. She was telling a stranger things she had never told me. She shared her deepest fantasies. And then, apparently, she went even further. I clenched my fists. The silence in the apartment weighed heavily on me, but even it couldn't drown out the noise in my head. The anxious wait lasted a long time, but a plan had already begun to form in my head. I had to find out everything. Just sit down and talk to her like a human being. This is how I once would have solved the problem. But after such a blow, trust in Ashley collapsed instantly. No, I needed proof. I needed complete clarity, so that there would be no doubts, no questions, in the spirit of, maybe it just seemed to me. I no longer wanted to be a person who blindly believed what he was told. I needed facts. When the doorbell rang, I jumped up as if I had been sitting on coals for a long time. He opened it, and Dan was on the threshold. He came in, glanced at my face, and immediately seriousness appeared in his eyes. I never thought I would be happy to see him, but at that moment I felt a certain relief. It's as if once I've taken the first step, I can't retreat. We went into the living room, and I, trying to keep my voice even, quickly stated the point. Wife, video chats, sudden fascination with other people's fantasies, perhaps real meetings. I didn't go into intimate details, but I didn't need to. Daniel understood everything perfectly. He listened in silence, without interrupting, nodding only occasionally, and his gaze became more and more concentrated. I saw that this did not shock him. No, he was not a man who was easily surprised. Rather, the analyst's mechanism began working inside him, cold, calculating. "So you want to know if she will actually meet anyone from these chats in the real world?" he clarified when I finished. "Exactly," I answered, clenching my hands into fists. "And if so, where and when?" "I need proof. Full." Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly and leaned forward. "Do you understand that this is already crossing the boundaries of the law? Hacking personal correspondence, installing hidden cameras. You can be punished for this." I smiled bitterly and exhaled heavily. "That's exactly what I understand," I muttered, realizing the irony of the situation. A lawyer who knows perfectly well where the line is, but is still ready to cross it. Daniel looked at me silently for a couple of seconds, then nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll help," he said after a short pause, "but it won't be easy. This will require some serious work, and not only mine." I looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "If we do this, we do it thoroughly," he continued. "We need to track her correspondence, understand with whom she communicates most often, and whether she already has agreements. If yes, calculate the place and time, and then catch her red-handed." His voice was calm, as if he was talking about an ordinary task, but a storm was raging inside me. "Are you ready to go to the end?" he asked, looking intently into my eyes. I ran my hand over my face, my chest tightened with anger and pain. "I must know the truth," I squeezed out. He nodded. "Then let's get started." We immediately got down to business. I gave him Ashley's laptop and showed him the folders and files I found. Dan quickly went through the structure, studying logs of visits and correspondence. His face showed almost no emotion, but I knew that inside his mind, like a well-oiled machine, was already running through algorithms, building schemes on how to get to the truth. He connected his external drive to the laptop, on which he stored all the necessary equipment for hacking, and began a process that I could only guess about. For the first time, I felt how my knowledge of the law and the reality into which I myself was now climbing were divided into two parallel universes. 2 hours passed. I wandered around the apartment while Dan, without stopping, tapped on the keys. Occasionally, he called me over and asked clarifying questions. For example, did I know what payment cards Ashley uses, what her favorite applications or instant messengers might be, besides the obvious ones. I gave all the information I could remember. At some point, I thought that she might have a second phone, but so far I have not found confirmation of this. Finally, when my patience was wearing thin, Dan leaned back in his chair and took off his headphones. He looked tired but happy, like a miner who had found a gold mine. "There's something," he said, pointing at the screen. "I found correspondence in one hidden application. It appears to automatically delete messages after a few hours, but some traces remain on the server. A normal user would not be able to see this. But there is a thread here that mentions a specific meeting place and time." My heart seemed to leap into my throat. "And what's there?" I asked with excitement. "Baywood Suites Hotel, tomorrow, lunchtime. The room number is 214, apparently." I closed my eyes, trying to process what I heard. It was no longer an imaginary picture in my head. This was reality. Number, time, place, everything is specific. I felt a wave of realization rise within me. My wife was actually going to meet a man she found in one of her chat rooms. "I want to be there," I said quietly, opening my eyes and looking at Dan. "I have to see this with my own eyes." "You are sure?" He looked at me with obvious sympathy. "Maybe it would be better. Well, I don't know, to try to talk to her earlier." "No," I answered firmly. "I need proof. I don't want confrontation and loud scandals. I need to be absolutely confident in everything I do next." Dan nodded, realizing that there was no point in trying to dissuade me. "Fine, but just come and sit in front of the door. This is not only dangerous, but also useless. If she sees you, everything will be in vain." "I want to install cameras," I said, and I myself shuddered at these words. "Inside the room. I need to record everything. Her every step, every word. I want to see everything." He frowned. "It's illegal," he noted. "Serious trouble, Matt. Cameras in a hotel room are a violation of a bunch of laws." "I know," I clenched my teeth, "but there is no other way." My hands clenched into fists until my knuckles turned white. I understood how wrong it was to encroach on someone else's personal space, even if we were talking about my own wife. But at that moment, all moral barriers faded into the background. The belief that this act could give me the truth outweighed everything else. Dan sighed heavily. "Okay," he finally said, "I have contacts. I can try to hack the reservation system. We'll find out if she really booked this room herself, or if she will do it when she meets her. Well, pen pal, if there is a reservation, then all that remains is to somehow install the cameras. But I think it's impossible to do without access to the number itself." I knew what he was getting at. We'll have to find a way to get into the hotel in advance or bribe one of the staff to help us. It looked like a scene from a cheap spy movie, and yet I couldn't stop. Do what you need to do, I said, sitting down tiredly on the sofa. I will take all the risks. Our plan came together in a matter of minutes. Dan first went online to try to track down the reservation. It took time and knowledge, which, fortunately, he possessed. Studying the Baywood Suites server system, he squinted, bit his lip, and muttered curses several times when he ran into complex security steps. I watched from the sidelines, occasionally offering help, but I understood that it was better not to interfere. It took him 2 hours before he found what he needed. The reservation for room 214 did exist, with prepayment and confirmed reservation in the name of a certain Mary Phillips. Nickname, maybe, but I was willing to bet that it was organized by the man with whom Ashley was corresponding, or even Ashley herself, hiding behind a different last name. It was still impossible to give an exact answer. Dan leaned back, rubbing his eyes. It looks like she or he, in general, one of them did everything carefully. Payment via a virtual card. The data is fake, but an advance payment has been made. The number will definitely be busy tomorrow. What's next? How do we install the cameras? I asked directly, trying not to think about how terrible the very thought of secretly observing my wife sounds. Dan opened a new search and began to correspond with someone. I knew that he kept in his contact list people who knew how to solve issues locally. In particular, those who could get a low-level position in a hotel or had connections in the service industry to gain access to rooms. I have a friend, her name is Lauren, Dan explained, without looking up from his correspondence. Last year, she worked part-time in various hotels, but now, well, it doesn't matter what she does. I'll try to reach her. If she's lucky, she'll be able to talk to her colleagues who work at Baywood Suites and see if they can get hidden cameras through them. I didn't say anything, just nodded. My head was spinning, but I couldn't and didn't want to stop. This took a few more hours. We managed to go to the store, eat quickly, and then return to the computers. Finally, in the evening, Dan looked up from the phone and grinned with satisfaction. It seems everything is settled. Lauren found a mutual friend who now works security at Baywood Suites. He agrees for a fee to look after the empty room before moving in and, most importantly, to give us the opportunity to quietly install cameras. Of course, time will be limited, so we can install literally a couple of hidden devices, and the sound will most likely be so-so. I felt like everything was shrinking inside. Were we really going to pull this off, sneak into a hotel, set up cameras, and then watch my wife date another man? My conscience and knowledge of the consequences of breaking the law screamed, but mental pain, resentment, and the desire to see the truth with my own eyes drowned out this moral anxiety. Great, I replied, trying not to look Dan in the eye. When can we do this? Most likely in the morning. More precisely, tomorrow afternoon. We will be given literally half an hour a break in cleaning while the room is free. Everything needs to be planned well. We had no room for error. There was little time left, but something inside me told me that everything was going according to plan. Terrible, disgusting, but my plan. The night passed in confusion. I hardly slept. Ashley returned home tired, shrugged her shoulders at my routine question about how her day went, and quickly disappeared into her room, citing urgent work documents. We barely exchanged a few words. I saw a moment of concern in her gaze. Perhaps she noticed how tense I was. But I pretended that everything was fine. We both had something to hide, and this game of equals continued within the walls of our home. In the morning, I got up before her, quickly took a shower, and, without waiting for her to wake up, left the house. I didn't have the strength to look her in the eyes without risking revealing my condition. It seemed to me that if I was left alone with her again, I would either break down or once again freeze in a terrible, sticky silence. Dan and I met at the Baywood Suites entrance around noon, a small, neat hotel, unremarkable in appearance. Inside there is a spacious hall with classic furniture, a smiling receptionist, and the smell of coffee from the lobby bar, and all this shone with deceptive calm. We walked past the guests, behaving like ordinary clients, and went up the stairs to the second floor, without attracting attention to ourselves. The same Lauren acquaintance was already waiting for us, a short guy in a security guard's uniform, who cast a quick glance at us and silently nodded, pointing to the door at the end of the corridor. Number 214. My heart echoed loudly in my chest when I saw a sign attached to the wall. It seemed that the number itself was looking at me like a mockery. Here it is, your result. We went inside after the guard used the master key to open the door. The room was standard, nothing luxurious. A large bed in the middle of the room, a couple of armchairs by the window, a TV on the wall, bedside tables, and a wardrobe at the entrance. Everything is clean, neat, and unnoticeable. It was as if restraint itself was breathing from every corner. I was even afraid that we wouldn't be able to hide the cameras unnoticed. Everything was too visible. But Dan was prepared. He pulled out several tiny devices that looked like regular ballpoint pens and buttons, only without the logos. He explained that these are the latest mini cameras with wireless signal transmission, capable of operating for several hours in autonomous mode. One was disguised as a smoke detector, the second as a small decorative element, and we installed the third inside the TV unit, leaving only a tiny lens at the level of the ventilation grill. It all took about 20 minutes. All this time the guard stood at the door, nervously looking into the corridor. When we finished, I looked around. The place looked as if no one had ever entered. We left exactly the same pillows and bedspreads. Everything was in its place. It would seem like an ordinary room in which dozens of guests stay per day. But now he was locked in my mind, like a stage in a theater where the most tragic performance of my life would take place. "It's ready," Dan said in a whisper. "The cameras are connected. The signal will go to our host through an encrypted channel. I can stream everything to your laptop. But keep in mind, it's better for us to be nearby because the connection may be lost." "I understand," I answered, also for some reason in a whisper, although there were no strangers around. "I think we can rent a room here to remain unnoticed and watch the broadcast." That's what we decided. The guard nodded, took his reward, and we left the room, trying not to leave any traces. On leaving the hotel, we politely inquire about the availability of rooms. The girl at the reception smiled and offered us room 216, one door from 214. A bitter smile flashed inside me. How simple everything is. Taking the keys, we went back up and checked into room 216. There was exactly the same interior, only the furniture was arranged in a mirror image. Dan sat down at the table, took out his laptop, and checked the camera. A black and white picture of number 214 appeared on the screen, slightly distorted, but quite clear. You could even see the pattern on the bedspread. He turned on the sound silence. Only some rustling could be heard from somewhere in the corridor. "I'll set up the recording," he said, turning to me. "Everything that happens will be saved on the hard drive." "Thank you," I squeezed out, feeling how everything inside me was shrinking. From that moment on, time passed painfully long. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The meeting, according to the correspondence, should take place around lunchtime. I spent these hours waiting as if in a dream. At first Dan and I sat silently, watching TV. Then we tried to chat about something abstract, about politics, about my past affairs, about music. But the conversation didn't go well. I constantly glanced sideways at the laptop, where the empty number 214 was still broadcast. Dan decided to go out for coffee, inviting me to get some air. I refused. I couldn't bring myself to leave this observation post. I was afraid that she would come earlier, that something would not go according to plan. Left alone, I lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. A thought flashed through my head in passing. Or maybe I've already crossed the line. Maybe it's better to drop everything and leave. But the memory of how I saw her video chats, how she enthusiastically talked to strangers, looked at their bodies, scattered compliments, it instantly returned me to a state of cold determination. Dan returned half an hour later, handing me a glass of coffee. The hot drink sobered me up a little and brought back a sense of reality. We sat side by side, listening to the other guests mutter behind the thin walls, some laughing, some talking on the phone. And in the midst of this everyday routine, I waited for my world to collapse. The first alarm went off right on schedule. The camera recorded movement. A figure flashed through the doorway, but disappeared almost immediately. I leaned toward the screen, my breathing quickening. Maybe one of the service staff. After all, at the reception upon check-in, they usually give out the keys closer to the check-in. But what if this is the same mysterious man? A minute passed, and the door opened again. This time a tall man entered the room. The image was not the clearest, but in general terms I saw him. Dark hair, broad shoulders, he seemed to be about 30 or 40 years old, maybe a little older. He threw the sports bag onto the chair and looked around, as if checking the situation. He walked up to the bed and ran his hand over the bedspread. There was a sense of confidence in his movements, a certain habit of such meetings, as if this was not the first time he had used this method. I looked at the screen, and a disgusting feeling grew inside me. Standing in front of me was someone who probably slept with my wife. Or he was going to sleep with her today. Well, Dan said with a bitter intonation, it seems that this is it. The man sat down on the edge of the bed, took out his phone, and began typing something. He spoke in a low voice, but the camera did not catch this sound too clearly. I could only make out fragments, already here, waiting. Perhaps he was calling Ashley or texting her. My palms were sweating and my stomach was churning with panic. I didn't take my eyes off the screen. Everything that happened was a surreal nightmare for me. Time passed slowly. The man, apparently, was also nervous, although he tried to keep it up. He walked around the room, sometimes checking the window, looking at his watch, and looking at his phone again and again. We sat behind the wall of this room, hidden in the darkness, watching a stranger. But why a stranger? Script. The doors of 214 slid open again, and she appeared on the screen. Ashley, my wife. My vision darkened, and I almost dropped the glass of unfinished coffee. But with an effort of will, he forced himself to watch. She entered the room carefully, as if checking the situation. She closed the door behind her and froze for a moment, meeting the gaze of this man. Something in her face told me this was not the first time she had seen him. This was not the first meeting. There was already some kind of connection between them. Ashley bit her lip and took a step towards him. At the same time, he smiled and confidence was visible in his gestures. I felt my entire inner world tremble. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would jump out of my chest. My mind seemed to be split. One part screamed, "Turn it off, go away, stop this now," and the other ordered, "Look, remember, you need the whole truth." By force of will, I forced myself to sit and not turn away. Dan seemed to understand how hard it was for me. He turned off his phone so there would be no distractions and sat next to her without saying a word. Maybe he thought that words were completely inappropriate here. On the screen, Ashley approached the man, and they exchanged short phrases. I didn't hear them in full, only fragments. "Glad you came. I wanted to. How much time do we have?" Everything inside me was burning with resentment. I heard laughter, quiet, nervous, but there was some kind of intimacy in it. The same feminine giggle that I once thought was cute when she first met me. Now it was addressed to someone else. Their faces were so close that I could no longer distinguish who was making the first step. A moment, and they kissed. My wife, the woman to whom I swore my eternal support, whom I loved, stood 2 steps away from me behind the wall and pressed against another. It felt like I had been punched in the gut. But the worst was yet to come. This kiss was followed by something that I could not imagine even in my sickest fantasies. In the depths of my soul, with the last of my strength, I tried to find at least a grain of rational explanation. Perhaps she was mistaken, confused, she needs help. But the picture that unfolded in front of me refuted all these assumptions. Everything that happened was mutual and passionate. I didn't want to see, but I couldn't look away. The camera captured every gesture. Their dialogue became fragmentary. I could only distinguish phrases like, "You promised," "Show me what you can do," She whispered something in response, and I felt my insides shrink. They clearly knew each other not yesterday, because the hints and half-hints sounded as if they were continuing some long-standing dialogue. Maybe we should turn off the sound, Dan suggested quietly, seeing how pale I turned. I shook my head. I needed to hear everything, see everything. It may cripple my soul, but I will not give up. The scene developed rapidly, and the worst thing is that instead of the previous furious anger, I began to feel some kind of chilling emptiness. It was as if I had stopped being myself and became an observer of someone else's film. Somewhere in the depths of my consciousness arose, "Stop, enough, you already understand everything." But I couldn't get up. I was chained to the screen with a feeling of doom and treacherous melancholy. The words sighs flashed through their dialogue again, even more openly and loudly. I couldn't tell whether he was saying it himself, boasting, or she was repeating it herself with admiration, but the fact remained that this topic seemed to inflame them even more. At that moment, something inside me seemed to break. All my conversations with Ashley replayed in my head, her assurances that size is not the main thing, her support, her tenderness, her smile when I was so vulnerable. It turned out that all this is nothing more than an illusion, or was she simply tired of deceiving herself and was now looking for replenishment from another? I bit my lip. I had a hard time suppressing the urge to smash this laptop to smithereens. Dan repeatedly cast worried glances at me, but I stubbornly did not take my eyes off the screen. I was so disconnected from reality that I barely noticed how I was clenching my hand into a fist, pressing my nails into my palm. Perhaps half an hour passed, maybe more. I lost track of time. When the bastard and Ashley finally started talking, I heard snippets of their tired conversation. "We could do this more often," he muttered. I I need to think," Ashley sighed quietly. "I can't just disappear from home. My husband might notice." My heart skipped a beat. It's strange that I was still experiencing another twinge of jealousy, but still. Obviously, she was still afraid that I would guess that she had a lover. This seemed especially absurd to me because right now I am sitting behind the wall and watching everything through cameras. I expected that everything would start to burn in my soul, but no. Instead, I was filled with dead silence. It was as if all the emotions had burned out, leaving only a scorched plain. "Maybe then you'll leave him?" the man asked, seeming genuinely interested. "I don't know," she answered. "It's difficult for me. I'm used to the stability that we have with him." She didn't finish. "Let's just enjoy what we have." On her face, I saw a shadow of sadness, almost regret. Or did I just imagine it? Maybe. She closed her eyes. The man looked at his watch and nodded. Apparently, he didn't want to stay long. He got up, took a towel, and disappeared into the bathroom. Ashley, left alone, turned on her side for a moment, and her gaze fell on the phone. Maybe she was thinking about what I was doing now. I saw her face, there was no despair in it, rather fatigue. Why is she doing this? What hole inside her made her commit betrayal? I also asked myself these questions, but I couldn't find an answer. They got dressed a few minutes later, acted like everything was fine. A couple of everyday phrases. "Hurry up, it's time to leave. I'll text you in the evening. Be careful in the parking lot." That's all. I didn't hear an agreement about a new meeting, but the phrase, "I'll write to you," sounded quite confident. It became clear, today is far from the end. Finally, Ashley left the room, and the man locked the door and also left 214. Dan silently leaned back in his chair, turned down the volume, turned off the broadcast, and looked at me. "What's next, Matt?" he asked quietly. What's next? Good question. I felt empty to the core. Without strength, without emotions, without a future. I looked at the black laptop screen, where just a second ago I had seen the most cruel betrayal of my life, and I understood. There was no turning back. Everything that was once our family crumbled to dust before my eyes. "I don't know," I finally answered. "I really don't know." We collected the equipment and saved the records. I paid for the room, and we went down the elevator in silence. As I exited the luxurious glass doors, I saw the silhouettes of Ashley and that man. They were standing a little to the side near the parking lot. He put his arm around her waist. She bowed her head to his chest. Then they talked briefly about something and got into the car. In a matter of seconds, they were out of sight. When Dan and I went outside, he quietly put his hand on my shoulder. "I'm very sorry, friend," he said. "If I could do something." I didn't know what to answer. I chose this path myself. Held him back when he offered to leave earlier. Now I got what I wanted. Evidence, the complete truth, recorded on several gigabytes of video. But the feeling of satisfaction did not come. "Thank you," was all I said. "You did what you could. Then I will act on my own." He nodded, realizing that now was not the place or time for questions. We drove off in different directions, and when I was left alone in the car, I sat behind the wheel for some time without turning on the engine. I looked at the evening lights of the city, at the cars flying past, at the couples holding hands, at the people laughing, enjoying the day off. I thought, in their eyes, the whole world is normal, but for me it collapsed. I don't remember how long I sat there, probably 10 minutes, maybe more. Then he slowly started the engine and drove out onto the road. I was in no hurry to go home. I just felt that inside me, in the very depths of my consciousness, the foundation of some new line of behavior was being laid cold, calculating, without unnecessary emotions. I became determined to never let anyone humiliate me like that again. Of course, the logical question is, what to do with these recordings now? Pursued me, but I drove him away. I'm not ready to talk to Ashley or take official action yet. All I knew, the old Matthew, who loved her, was ready to forgive, support, and believe he remained there, in room 214, under the cold eye of hidden cameras. Another person came to replace him, whose feelings died or fell into a lethargic sleep. I wasn't angry, hatred didn't burn within me. I wasn't jealous because I understood that she had already chosen her path. It seemed to me that I was experiencing something akin to indifference. The past slammed shut, the future stood before me as a foggy unknown. I parked on the side of the road a few blocks from the house and just sat there, clutching the steering wheel like I was drowning in a life preserver. The lights of passing cars slid past the windows, and each headlight reflected on the windshield hurt my eyes painfully. It seemed to me that everything inside me was burned to the ground. There was no anger, no tears, or even that dull emptiness that I felt a couple of hours ago. There was only a state similar to a strange numbness when consciousness stubbornly refuses to accept reality. I had to make a decision about how to proceed. In the past, I always considered myself a person who would not go to extreme measures, be it in work, in relationships, in small everyday matters. I was proud of my ability to find compromises and peaceful solutions to conflicts. But what I saw in room 214 seemed to squeeze out the remnants of humanism from me. A single question pulsed in my head. Why did she do this? Of course, I didn't know the answer. Perhaps Ashley herself didn't know. But now it didn't matter anymore. I thought for a long time what to do. Part of me, still tormented by love and memories of a happy past, whispered barely audibly, "Go away silently. Just say what you know and turn around. Let him live as he knows." But the other side, the same one that was revealed to me after her betrayal, screamed loudly about a retaliatory strike. "Take revenge. Let her feel the same humiliation and pain that you felt," this voice sounded, growing with every minute. And at that moment, I realized that I had already made a choice. I once read that the betrayal of a loved one destroys not only emotional ties, but also the idea of one's own worth. It's as if a piece of your soul is being torn out from you, and with it, self-confidence in your completeness. All my life I tried to fight complexes and grievances associated with my body, with childhood traumas. And all these years, Ashley seemed to create a reliable rear for me. Now it turns out that reliability was an illusion. This realization burned inside me. I didn't just feel betrayed, I felt deceived at my most important point of vulnerability. My hand automatically reached for the phone. The contents of Dan's hard drive, namely the video recording in room 214, were already on my personal laptop. The copy that, contrary to all logic, I duplicated for myself lay in the cloud, protected by a password that no one knew about. That evening, before driving home, I made several calls. One of them was to contact Dan again. I demanded from him access to the raw material, to all the photographs, screenshots of correspondence, and additional video fragments that might have been there. For what? He asked briefly and, judging by his tone, seriously concerned. I need everything, I replied. Don't ask questions. Dan knew how to read intonation and understood that I would not leave it halfway. He cursed briefly, but after a few minutes he sent me the link. You are entering dangerous territory, Matthew, he said finally. I just thanked him and hung up the call. When I got home, Ashley was already there. She was sitting on the living room couch with her arms crossed and looking tired. I immediately noticed that she had changed her clothes, and her hair was still damp from the shower. Most likely, she took a bath to wash away the smell of a strange man. At this thought, I felt physically ill. Hello, she said when I entered. You're late. I didn't answer. He didn't even glance at her. I walked into the bedroom and slammed the door behind me. I didn't want to hear her voice. I didn't want to look at her. I was afraid that an attack of either rage or weakness would come over me, and I swore not to show either one or the other. She seemed to shout something after her, perhaps asking if everything was okay. I didn't hear and didn't want to hear. So the night passed. I lay on our marital bed, but never fell asleep. She didn't come to see me, probably thinking I was tired or not in the mood. The truth could be so close, but she didn't seem to realize that I already knew everything. Or she guessed, but was afraid to talk. In any case, we had to face reality. The next morning, when it was dawn, I left the room. Ashley was not in the house, and according to the note on the table, she had gone to see an early patient. There, on the piece of paper, there are literally a couple of phrases. I'm busy. I see that you also work a lot. Let's discuss vacation in the evening. I read these words with some tired irony. Vacation? What vacation? We hardly have at least one more day together on this planet. Throwing the note, I began to implement my plan. The first thing I did was go into her office, where she kept a folder with the addresses and phone numbers of her patients, as well as a list of contacts of colleagues from whom she took consultations. I knew about the existence of this folder. It contained work numbers, emails, and sometimes personal contacts of especially privileged clients who wanted to communicate in an informal setting. I had no idea what I was going to do with this data. I was still filled with resentment mixed with grim determination, but I knew I wanted to get to every part of her life. I needed her whole built world to shake the same way mine began to shake when I saw her kissing that man in room 214. I tiptoed into her office and carefully opened the bottom drawer of the desk. There was a familiar leather notebook where she wrote down office contacts. There were some notes left on top, apparently lecture material on psychology. She sometimes spoke at specialized conferences. I carefully pushed them aside, took out a notebook, and glanced over the pages. An abundance of names, surnames, company names. Jones, Margaret contact email, phone number. Samuel, Max personal mobile. White, Rebecca lawyer, direction. It was a whole world of people whom she helped solve internal problems, and sometimes she simply took advice from specialists in related fields. But the main thing that interested me was the section marked colleagues. There were the names and surnames of her friends at the clinic, bosses, and partners. I spent the next half hour taking pictures of all these recordings using my phone. Then he opened the laptop, where there were video files, and began to create several folders with evidence. I am a lawyer, and my professional skills have now turned into evil. I systematically collected a dossier on my own wife. Screenshots of her correspondence, fragments of the recording where her face is visible. I distributed everything into thematic folders. I understood that I was carrying in my hands a nuclear bomb that could tear her life into pieces. But that's exactly what I wanted. At that moment, I remembered the words of my ethics teacher at the university. Sometimes the most terrible weapon is the truth that a person wants to hide. He said this in the context of legal proceedings, but it seems his lesson was eerily applicable to my personal drama. When the base was assembled, I sat down and looked at the screen for 10 minutes. unable to believe that I had crossed such a line. However, he could no longer stop. I was not an expert in the field of anonymous mailings and hacking of social connections, but I had some skills developed in legal practice. I knew how email chains were built, how you could send messages from temporary accounts, how to hide your real IP. This was enough to carry out his evil plan. The main idea was that the video and photos with evidence would immediately reach a large number of recipients who were important in her life. The clinic where she worked, her colleagues who had weight in the professional community, close relatives with whom she kept in touch. I wanted to create maximum resonance, knowing how much her reputation and future career would depend on it, but at the same time do it in such a way that I myself would not face the consequences of violating the legal laws of our country. My old mind might have called it monstrous, but I saw before my eyes only her smile addressed to her lover, and I understood that no one stood on ceremony with my feelings. At the same time, I began to think about how to convey the materials to her friends. Many of them lived on social networks, former classmates, work friends, acquaintances with whom she communicated. I assumed that if the information popped up in their general feed or in private messages, the effect would be the same. The only but is that I needed to avoid the risk that this was a direct link to me. Anonymity required accuracy. You never know, maybe someone will guess who was behind this mailing. I prepared carefully, created several new email addresses on different services using VPN and password generators. I registered on a couple of platforms where you can send messages for free from temporary accounts so that neither the IP nor the name of the sender coincides with my data. I launched an encrypted storage where I uploaded files, labeling them with simple names like vid001, emizo34, and so on. I attached a short description to each file, bed scene of the wife who cheated on her husband, talking about plans for the next meeting, discussing the size of her lover, and other humiliating specifics that should have hit her self-esteem. Next, I compiled a couple of letter templates. For example, one of them meant, "Dear colleagues and acquaintances of Ashley Martinez, we enclose materials that shed light on her personal life and true face. Please review and consider whether you want to continue doing business with a person who demonstrates such moral principles behind the backs of his loved ones." It sounded vile, as if written by an embittered, anonymous person. This is exactly the effect I was looking for. In another letter, addressed to her relatives and close friends, the text was even harsher. "Family is something Ashley has always been proud of. But look at how she actually treats her family and loved ones. You might want to know why she hid such shameful facts about her life." I understood that in the eyes of many I would look like a real monster if the truth about the sender ever came to light. But at that moment I couldn't stop. Every second of preparation reminded me of what she did to me in room 214, how she calmly and brazenly deceived me for many months. And deep down I wanted to destroy her reputation just as she had destroyed my trust. This whole process took me almost the whole day. I worked tirelessly. It was only after sunset that I realized that Ashley was about to return from work. Her messages came to my phone, but I didn't open them. I didn't want to hear the usual, "How are you?" or "We're out of milk." Nothing mattered before the grand revenge I was preparing. Finally, when everything was ready, I closed the laptop and squeezed my temples with my hands, feeling how gloomy determination was poisoning my already sick soul. The last step remained: wait for her to leave home, and I was sure that in the evening she would go somewhere again, be it a store or a friend, and then, taking advantage of the silence, launch mailings. I wanted the moment she returned that everything around me would begin to fall apart. But life decreed otherwise. Ashley came home earlier than I expected. I heard the front door slam and winced. She walked into the living room, where I was sitting in the twilight with my head down. A heavy silence hung between us, which she broke. "Are you okay, Matt?" she said quietly, with some sincere anxiety in her voice. I looked up sharply. Her face was tired, but quite friendly, as if she was really worried about me, not suspecting anything that I knew of her secret. This contrast turned everything inside me. I felt a wave of disgusting bitterness rise up in my throat. Yes, I answered briefly. I knew that I couldn't cause a scandal now. The risk of breaking down and saying something that I would later regret was too great. My plan meant that everything had to fall on her suddenly and completely. I needed time to discreetly hit send on all my canned emails, but she was ahead of the curve. "Don't you want to talk?" she asked, taking a step forward. "About what?" I responded coldly. "I see you haven't been yourself these last few days." We began to communicate less. One could hear excitement in her voice. I couldn't believe she was trying to act caring and interested. Maybe deep down she was still tormented by her conscience, and she realized that she was close to exposure. "Ashley," I finally said, "I'm just tired. Let's not now." She frowned, but remained silent. She stood there for a couple of seconds, as if waiting for me to change my mind, and then turned around and went into the kitchen. I was even sorry that she didn't insist. Inside, I was burning with a desire to throw the video in her face, to shout that it was all over. But cold rationality held me back. The whole evening passed in silence. We, like two ghosts, wandered through different rooms. I specifically avoided places where she could intercept me and try to start a sincere conversation. I knew that at such moments she had a talent for melting the ice, but now this ice was impenetrable. At some point, I heard her coming up the stairs, apparently going to take a shower or change clothes in the bedroom. This was my chance. That night, after Ashley fell asleep, I left the house and drove to a 24-hour office supply store. I bought a simple white envelope and a sheet of good thick paper there. On the way back, I stopped at the supermarket and bought two large boxes, one regular, the other gift, in which I could put various things. When I returned, I sat down at the kitchen table and began to write a letter that I intended to leave for her. The words poured into my head in confusion, but I tried to formulate everything so that she would read me to the end and understand the scale of the disaster. I set myself the task of not slipping into insults and not writing a clumsy confession of the victim. It should have been a cold and hard statement of facts, full of contempt and finality. This is roughly what I wrote. Work. You led me by the nose for a long time. You lied and cheated, destroying everything that was between us. I saw you with another man. I know about your video chats, about your coveted sizes, and the lies you fed me for years. All your ostentatious sympathy and words turned out to be nothing more than a fake. Perhaps you yourself believed this lie and then got confused, or maybe you were like that from the beginning. I don't care. Know that from this moment on you no longer have a husband, no respect, no future in the form that you imagined. Don't look for me. There will be no more excuses. Our life is over. Divorce is a formality, which I will inform you about later. I hope you have enough time in your new hell to think about the choices you made. Goodbye. M. I put down my pen and closed my eyes. My heart was pounding in my chest and my hand was shaking. I reread what I had written and realized that this letter was my last communication with her. There was no more talk about any conversations, about any regret, understand, forgive. Then I took our wedding ring out of my pocket. I rolled it between my fingers for several minutes. Once this thin strip of gold symbolizes eternal love and fidelity, but now it seems like a mockery. I took the pliers and squeezed the metal hard, feeling how it gave in. The ring was cracked, deformed into an ugly shape. I threw it into the empty cup with the remaining coffee. I never thought that I was capable of such theater, but I didn't regret it one bit. Everything inside me screamed that this was right. Our sacred ring must be destroyed so that there was no turning back. There was one more point left. A few days ago, I discovered Ashley had a box of toys that clearly indicated her new passion. And a cruel thought came into my head. I imagined with gloating how she would find this reminder next to my letter. The idea itself was low, but I didn't stop. I found that same box, put the broken ring there, and attached an envelope with a letter on top. I closed the box with a gift lid and tied it with a simple white ribbon. It looked almost elegant if not for the understanding that hidden inside was my last hello to her adultery. In the morning, even before she woke up, I took my things out of the house fortunately, Over the previous days, I managed to pack most of them into the trunk of the car. I left the key on the table and placed the box in the bedroom on our marital bed. What will be the expression on her face when she reads the letter and realizes that it's all over? Perhaps this was the strongest adrenaline rush in all my 35 years. I returned to my laptop and quickly connected all the temporary accounts, one by one, pasting the address lists from the notepad, adding the desired recipients to the copy. All my created mails were connected to work, and I clicked send over and over again. Letters were sent in dozens, and given the attached files, I understood that people would be shocked not just by rumors, but by visual video and photo evidence. Leaving the house, I clicked the car lock and started the engine. The neighbors seemed to be still sleeping. Pre-dawn silence reigned on the street. I didn't stop. I pressed the gas and drove away. I rented a room in a small hotel on the other side of town. I didn't tell Dan or our other mutual friends about my plans. I wanted to isolate myself from everyone until I figured out how to arrange my life further. I had a safety net, savings, a good income, and the ability to quickly adapt to new conditions. The only thing that held me back was the pain of realizing the final break. But the real show began to happen within a few hours. My phone was blowing up with notifications. I turned off all sounds in advance, but the vibration worked continuously. Colleagues, acquaintances, even mutual friends of our couple wrote to me, who, apparently, already had questions for me. He didn't answer anyone. He didn't want to enter into any explanations. I knew that news of the scandalous video had spread across the internet at the speed of light. After some time, a call came from her mother. I didn't answer the phone, but she left a voicemail that sounded panicked. "Matthew, what is this madness? What happened to Ashley? What kind of letters? This is some kind of nightmare. Please call." I erased this message without even listening to it. Then text notifications from her friends started coming. However, the most important thing was ahead: Ashley herself. I expected that a flurry of her attempts to call, or at least write to me, was about to begin. And I was wrong at first. Not a single message was received. Perhaps she was frozen by shock, or perhaps she decided to act cautiously out of habit. But I knew perfectly well that she had already come to her senses and understood what had happened. By noon, I couldn't stand it and still turned on Wi-Fi on my phone to check what was in my messengers. There were a dozen messages from an unknown number. "Matthew, please talk to me. I know you did it. You don't understand what you've done. I beg you, give me a chance to explain myself. That's all." And then a confused set of words, which clearly indicated her panic. I didn't answer. I wasn't interested in her explanation. I wanted her to experience the depth of despair and understand that she had no way out. And by evening, real prayers began to pour in from her. I listened to all this and felt almost no compassion. Echoes of conscience, however, gently knocked. "You've gone too far," but I waved it off. The cruelty of my action was justified in my head by the thought, but she went too far when she had sex with someone else, when she laughed at my complexes, hiding the truth in correspondence with her lover. But I didn't know the worst thing yet. The next morning, I woke up to a persistent call. It was my former colleague, Mark, the same one who once introduced me to Ashley. I sighed and decided to answer because Mark was one of the few people whose opinion I cared about, no matter what. "Damn it, Matthew." His voice was immediately heard, full of indignation and anxiety. "What's happening?" I received links from some anonymous sender to a video. "There's this." At first I thought it was a fake, but then everything was revealed. I said nothing. Mark sighed heavily. "Listen, I understand that something terrible happened between you two, but you have no idea how Ashley is now. I tried to call her, but she didn't answer the phone, but her mother told me that she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She was fired from the clinic without severance pay because patients saw these materials. Her parents are going to ban her from appearing in the house. They are deathly afraid of public condemnation. Friends, everyone is just in shock. Nobody knows what to think." I felt something shrinking inside me, but I couldn't say it was a feeling of guilt. Rather, it was a bitter statement. The plan worked. I didn't answer Mark with anything definitive. He spent a couple more minutes expressing his misunderstanding, and making sure that I was not going to engage in dialogue, he hung up. On the third day after my operation, I learned that Ashley had actually run away from her parents' house when she realized that there would be no shelter for her there. One of her friends, who remained more or less neutral in this conflict, told me, probably in the hope that I would come to my senses and help my wife, that Ashley had rented a small apartment on the outskirts, trying to hide from calls and curses. But even there, she did not find peace. Information penetrated social networks, the videos became viral in their narrow circle, and the reputation of the benevolent psychologist was buried under an avalanche of ridicule and indignation. She walks around all pale like a ghost, that friend wrote to me. I'm afraid she won't make it. She's already in some kind of anxious, depressive state. I read these messages and realize that everything was going according to the worst-case scenario for her and essentially successful for me. But anxiety began to stir in my soul. What if she really can't handle it? I didn't want her to die. Or did I? No, I probably didn't want to. I just wanted her to feel the pain of betrayal at its fullest. However, when a couple of days later I found out that she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, something broke inside me. I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered, and a deep female voice identified herself as a nurse from the city psychiatric clinic. She asked if I really was Ashley Martinez's husband, and if I could provide some information about her insurance policy. In terms of, I asked in amazement, what's happening? We need proof of identity and payment, the voice continued calmly. Your wife was admitted to us in serious condition, accompanied by police and emergency medical personnel. Presumably, this is a nervous breakdown with aggressive outbursts. She is in poor condition. We need to sign papers. My heart began to beat at a frantic rhythm. Hello? Is it hard to hear you? She asked again. I pulled myself together with difficulty. Mentally, I understood that everything was going in the direction of my revenge. But the image of Ashley in the white chambers, with a confused look, gave me a shock that I did not expect. I wasn't prepared for things to go this far. Yes, I'm her husband, but we're on the verge of divorce, I finally squeezed out. I have all the documents. I don't know if I can sign anything for her. Okay, we'll contact her parents, the nurse responded and hung up. I was left standing in the middle of the hotel room, clutching the phone. I was overwhelmed with conflicting feelings. The next day, I went to my lawyer and filed for divorce, citing infidelity and inappropriate behavior of the spouse as the reason. When the formalities were settled, I returned to the hotel and sat stupidly in the lobby for several hours, wondering what to do next. The city of Atlanta, which was once a place of opportunity for me, now became associated with pain and betrayal. I didn't want to stay here any longer, in a place where every corner reminded me of the past. That evening, without hesitation, I went to the ticket website and bought a plane ticket to Seattle. Why go there? It seemed to me that this city on the other side of the country would become a symbol of a new chapter, where I would not have the ghosts of the past. I had already decided. I would quit my current company. Fortunately, the contracts allowed me to do this relatively painlessly, and I would find a job there. Lawyers are needed everywhere. There was only one unresolved matter left, a feeling of incompleteness. I reached for the phone to call the psychiatric clinic to find out about Ashley's condition, but every time I stopped myself. No, I firmly told myself, you have reached the end. Your only mission now is to leave this city forever and forget about her. Everything that happened between you burned to the ground. On the day of departure, I handed over my hotel keys and said goodbye to the administrator. All night long, thoughts swirled in my head about whether I would have done anything differently if I could go back in time. But every attempt to imagine a scenario of forgiveness or talk was crushed by the terrible wound that Ashley inflicted on me. Maybe someday the pain will subside and I will regret my mercilessness. But now I felt neither remorse nor joy, only relief, as if I was emerging from a stuffy, smoke-smelling room into fresh air. At the airport, an hour before landing, I sat at the panoramic window, looking at the planes that slowly pulled along the runway. 5 minutes later, they announced boarding for my flight. I threw the phone into my bag, stood up, and walked towards the exit. The plane's ramp took me into the arms of the cool morning wind. I took a seat by the window, fastened my seatbelt, and as the plane began to accelerate down the runway, I closed my eyes. A single phrase was pounding in my head: the end. Or maybe the beginning. I didn't know where my path would lead me, but I knew for sure that the chapter with the name Ashley and my naive desire to believe in love was completed forever. What conclusion did I draw from my first marriage? If a loved one tells you something is not important, don't believe it. Absolutely everything is important. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one, and 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 click